Welcome, baseball family, to another one of our fantastic interviews. We have a very special guest today with us, Paul Hembo, or you also know him as Hembo. You probably heard him on ESPN. Welcome, Paul. How you doing? Or Hembo, sorry. How you doing today?
Yes, please refer to me using my corporate nickname for the rest of the interview forthwith. I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be with you guys and talk some baseball. This book's been crazy. Like, this book that we're promoting has been like the interest in it, the opinions that it has created, the debate that it has engendered, the whole 9 yards. So I'm looking forward to dabbling in that a little bit, but also talking some baseball, because I think this is poised to be one of the best seasons we've had, at least in recent memory.
Agreed.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Okay, let's get into it real quick. First, we're going to start with a rundown, as we do with all of our guests. Our first question for you, Hembo: what is your quest?
My quest. I can define that however I'd like.
However you like.
Fantastic. My quest is to realize my dreams by doing what you guys are doing. I would love to talk about baseball for a living. If you ask me like what my dream job might be 10 years from now, it would be that some person was stupid or silly enough to pay me money to talk about baseball and nothing else. So that would be my quest. Now, obviously, there are greater things, larger things in life. I have 2 kids, my wife and I had baby girls, literally 2 people, twins last August. So there are other things in life, obviously, that are more important than baseball, but very few. So my quest, at least from a career standpoint, would be to be paid money to talk about baseball and nothing aside from baseball.
Yeah, we can relate to that. That's awesome. My next question for you: what is your favorite color?
My favorite color is blue. It always has been. I don't exactly know why. I've always been attracted to blue. Something like the color of blue that you're wearing on your hat right now, like a darker shade, navy shade kind of blue. Although I'm thinking through I'm a Philly guy, so I'm thinking through all my Philly teams, and there's a little splash of blue with the Sixers, but that's about it. So I haven't been defiled too much by my Philly brethren. So dark blue, and that's my final answer.
All right.
Nice.
So the Phillies then is your favorite team. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been rooting for the Phillies passionately since something like 2000. I was born in Baltimore, so I came to age as a fan of the Orioles and Cal Ripken, but my family moved there early enough in life to where I eventually switched my allegiance to the Phillies, and that was actually a pretty good time to do that, as it turns out.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it would be. So if the Phillies were a beverage, what would they be?
If the Phillies were a beverage, what would it be? Man, it's an interesting question. Not one that I've obviously thought of before. How about like a pineapple or mango high noon or White Claw? So I want to be able to consume it. It's refreshing. All right, it makes me feel great about myself. It makes me feel great about the day, and I can consume it every single day if I really want to. Probably not smart to watch the Phillies play 162 times a year, but that's going to be my answer to this question. Like a flavor of like a sparkling or like a spiked seltzer that I favor. And I would say if you want to do it 162 times a year, you could, but it's not going to be so great for your health.
That's a fact. I used to do that. That's part of my story. But anyway, Hembo, if baseball were an ice cream flavor, what would it be?
Man, so baseball last year would have been vanilla, because baseball last year had so little flavor. Baseball now is sherbet, because what we've done in the game is inject so much more athleticism, so much more pace, so much more tempo, so much more action, so much more stuff. And baseball is fundamentally better because of it. I can like vanilla and sherbet both. I happen to like both. But I think the sherbet in this case applies to a larger swath of audience, a larger portion of the fan base. And I'm the kind of fan that would watch no matter what, but I'm not the person for whom these rules apply. So I think what baseball is doing is great. And as a result, I'm watching a lot more baseball, like a lot of people, and eating a lot more sherbet, as it were.
That's awesome. Yeah, we actually have that question about what baseball needs.
Okay.
Do you think these are good changes? That's one of the first questions we were going to ask.
Awesome. Do you want me to dive into it right now?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm like a traditional older school fan. Like I'm a huge baseball history guy. I am a big fan of the unwritten rules, baseball's tradition, all these things that, have kind of been embedded in me as a fan and as a player from the time I was a very young fan. And so for the longest time, I think baseball's timelessness, shall we say, was a feature, right? It was like this one sport that had that. Now I think it's become a bug. And over the course of time, the players and the umpires abused the fact that they weren't on a timer. And we got used to this sort of never-ending slog. And that turned off a lot of people, and rightfully so. This was a time in which society was speeding up. We became obsessed with football, and baseball was slowing down. Like we were going in opposite directions. I think what the pitch clock has done, by the way, you're not losing any baseball. You're losing 30 minutes of literally nothing. What the pitch clock has done is not only giving you half an hour of your life back, but much more importantly, it has improved baseball's pace of play. And so a lot more stuff happens in a more condensed period of time. That ultimately, I think, is the best thing for the game. And so I understand if you're a baseball traditionalist, you might not find yourself in favor of some of the new rules and rules changes. I would challenge yourself, though, over the course of time, over the course of this season. I think that you'll find that you find yourself looking at your phone a lot less between pitches. I think you'll find yourself intrigued and excited by the additional stolen bases and some more base hits available for left-handed hitters and all the things that come as a result of this. And that's why I was so confident that they were going to work, because they workshopped these things in the minor league for the last few years. And we know for sure that they work because they tried it. That's the whole point of the minor league. I think they've gotten this thing mostly right.
Right. Yeah, we've talked about that in a text thread with a couple of our buddies that like Brig used to like read during baseball games between pitches, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't do that anymore. Like keep the book away, keep the phone away, and actually watch the game now. And that was one thing that I talked about with the pitch clock as well. Is it's like the play clock in football. You know when the play is going to happen. Like you've got a maximum of 40 seconds between plays, and now you've got a maximum of 15 seconds between pitches. 20 if there's somebody on base, but 5 seconds, who cares, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, to me, like the game, this is not a progressive like step forward. Like I don't view this as being like a woke decision by baseball, for lack of a better term. I view this as being like baseball being played at the speed in which it was intended to. Right? If you watch a baseball game at its zenith, when it was at its most popular, it looks something like what it does now. You know, like in terms of the speed, in terms of the tempo, in terms of the rhythm. Now, we're never going to get the starting pitcher throwing a complete game every fifth day. We're not going to get the stolen bases like we saw in the 80s. Like those kinds of things aren't likely to happen. But if the game is being played at the right speed, then we can deal with more strikeouts and more walks and the preponderance of home runs and things of that nature. Like it's important. Like you're not going to change that kind of stuff about baseball right now because pitchers are so great, right? And like we're talking about like this is the zenith of pitching. And so what we're going to do, like this is, these rules are in part, made hoping to curtail the fact that pitchers are so incredibly good now. But now if you let someone on base, you're not going to get let off the hook quite as easily. Now, if you get yourself into a problem in the fifth inning, you can't slow down to a crawl. You have to keep pitching. We're going to see a lot of those big innings exacerbated. And so I'm a fan, man. Like I really am. And I think the pitch clock ultimately is going to wind up sort of blending in the background. It's not going to be top of mind anymore. And you're going to wonder to yourself, why weren't we playing this fast for all these years, right? When World Series games were ending at midnight, for God's sakes. That time is coming.
Yeah. And I think part of it too is that there's always been the time. It's just that now it's being enforced. But anyway, sorry, go ahead, Brig.
Sure, absolutely.
Are you over the long ball, Hembo? Did I catch wind of that maybe?
So I don't want to get off my lawny. I do think that baseball at its best includes as many balls in play as possible. The problem is hitters are forced to make a trade-off now because pitchers are so good, because bullpens are so good, because velocity is so high that until you get to 2 strikes, you're really forced to swing from your heels if you have home run power. Like the possibility of being able to string together 3 consecutive hits in an inning to produce 1 run is so much harder now because pitchers are throwing so much harder, and it's so much more difficult. Like for even a punch and Judy hitter now, you're going to strike out at least once every other game, whereas previously that would have been a lot of strikeouts. And
Tony Gwynn doesn't exist anymore.
Correct. If Tony Gwynn was playing right now, Tony Gwynn either wouldn't produce the value he did then, or he would strike out twice as much. That's just how baseball is, And if Tony Gwynn faced literally anyone in the Twins bullpen, for example, it would be every one of those guys would be throwing way harder than they were throwing in the mid 90s when he was at his apex, right? That's just the fact of the matter. Like we know that pitchers and we know that athletes in general are better now than they ever were before, because we know in Olympic sports they break all the records every year pretty much. Like there are very few enduring records, right? Baseball is no different. Right now, pitchers are just ahead of position players. I understand the reflex to try and homer. My hope, and so far what the numbers say, is that left-handed hitters are making a concerted effort not to launch the ball as much, and especially with 2 strikes. So my hope is that we continue to see that kind of progress made, because if baseball can inject more batted balls and more base runners into the sport, that's going to be a fundamentally good thing for everyone who enjoys it like we do.
Yeah.
So I have a quick question for you about athleticism
in the long ball.
Yeah, we're super into the bunt. But I have a quick question for you about athleticism. Like, this is a hill that I am probably going to end up dying on. But I feel like Babe Ruth wouldn't be able to compete in today's game. Do you feel the same way? Or is he transcendent?
No. If Babe Ruth was plugged into a lineup today, like he would have no idea what to do with Shohei Ohtani's sweeper, or Johan Duran's slider, or Hunter Green's
fastball, slider, right? Yeah, any of those.
Babe Ruth was playing baseball at a time in which no one could do anything like they could now, right? Like the pitching that he saw, like this 80-mile-per-hour slop, would make us laugh today. Like, the 3 of us might hit 300 in a lineup in 1920, but that's That's not really material, and I'll tell you why. A player can only be compared to their contemporaries, right? And so the exact same thing that you just said about Babe Ruth, you could say about Aaron Judge 100 years from now, and it could still apply. That's categorically unfair. We are all products of our environment. The only way to compare players is in relation to their peers, in relation to their contemporaries. So I'm not going to penalize Babe Ruth for the fact that he never saw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, or the fact that he primarily played against white players, or anything of that kind. Because Babe Ruth was born when he was born. And so that was his lot in life. And he happened to just so incredibly exceed everyone at that time. And he should be considered the GOAT for that. And so I do agree with you. I just think it's the wrong question to ask.
Okay. I can appreciate that.
So is the right question to ask then, how do we reconcile baseball's obsession with its own history in the contemporary view of statistics and records being broken and things like that?
It's a great question. This is sort of a passion point of mine, because it's without context neutral statistics are mostly worthless. Now, obviously, we have ways to be able to measure players across eras, regardless of what you think of wins above replacement. WAR is merely one tool. We can debate till we're blue in the face how valuable it is. I like ERA plus and OPS plus from Baseball Reference because they neutralize for the ballpark in which you play and the scoring environment at the time. But comparing the players' raw stats, like comparing Babe Ruth's raw stats to Aaron Judge's raw stats is apples and bananas. Like this, it's not like for like. I think it's important that we can both appreciate the history of baseball and the numbers that players produced without at the same time understanding like how hard it was to hit then and how hard it was to hit now. The reason I thought Aaron Judge's season last year was so unbelievable is because of the number of different pitches he had to face and the quality of stuff that he had to face, right? And the fact that he's playing in a much more difficult hitter's environment than Babe Ruth or in all candor, most hitters ever were, aside from maybe like the mid to late 60s. And so we have the tools now that can do that for us properly. So that's like I said, you can only be compared to your contemporaries, but now luckily we have tools for which you can be compared across eras to people from a variety of spectrums or time frames or ballparks or anything of that nature. Unfortunately, that's not quite come to fruition with the Negro Leagues. My hope is that as they turn over more and more box scores and we collect more and more information, we can finally reach a place where I can actually compare Josh Gibson to Babe Ruth properly. We're not quite there yet. I hope that we are someday.
Yeah, that'd be a great way to go. So we only have a couple minutes left. Let's talk about the book just a little bit. I'm curious, what was your process? So Greeny told us that like you were like heading up the research for this thing, that you did all the legwork for the research, is basically what you told us. I'm curious what your process was with that, because that is a lot of information to gather. Like that is dense with information.
Yeah. Dense is actually the best word I think to describe the book. Now that you say it, like because I mean, like you finish each of the 100 chapters and. Like he describes them as snackable. I think you're getting a meal out of every chapter. We're not heavy on words, but we're heavy on content, right? On volume in that respect. And so honestly, like it began as something of a science and ended up as something of an art. You obviously start in a place in which you just scour the globe to make sure that you have every person that ever wore a certain number that might be considered for this. And you create a massive Google Doc in my case, and you plug them in. But we also wanted to include teams and commentators and coaches and race car drivers and horses and individual athletes, obviously, to be able to represent more than a century of sporting life, right? Like to do this project properly, we had to transcend just who was the best player to wear number X. In fact, of our 100 chapters in our book, only 56 of them are jersey numbers, believe it or not. So that's a huge portion of the book. That's records, and that's years. That's rivalries, right? So it took a long time. It took, I would say, probably 6 months for me to be able to compile all that stuff. And I spent probably, at least at one point or another, almost every day opening up that document to make sure that I left no stone unturned. But it was my belief that we should really create like the book of record here, for lack of a better term. And in order to do that, you can't miss stuff. You can't exclude sports. You can't short shrift your research. And so I took a lot of pride in both compiling that list, and then once we came to our 100 choices, making sure that those players, in most cases, were as well represented with statistics and information as could possibly be. And from that standpoint, I'm exceedingly proud because I think this is as good a like history primer that you'll find on most all of these people, short of reading their own biographies. But that's obviously, I was going to read 100 biographies in order to prepare this book. But I think that you'll come away illuminated by something, even if you know everything in the world about, say, Willie Mays, who, spoiler alert, occupies chapter 24 in our book. I'd like to think that if you know everything in the world about Willie Mays, you'll still come away from reading this and say, that's one thing I did not know about Willie Mays, and so I'm better off for it.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about putting together a pocket edition that somebody could take with them to the bar? Be like, okay, let's start the debate. Let's start the debate. We've got
That's
a
a good idea.
the definitive
like a
list.
New Testament, like a gospel tract.
Yeah, gospel track. That's right.
Yeah, I don't know if this. By the way, I don't know if this is a compliment or not, because like obviously I don't know. You can see the size of the thing. You guys just held it up. The compliment that I received, I guess it's a compliment from a friend of mine. He's like, "This is the perfect bathroom book because each of these chapters are perfectly in line with how long I usually take in the bathroom." And it's like, I don't exactly know if I should be saying that on the radio on shows, but like, thanks, Alex. I appreciate the 2 cents. Like that's just one piece of feedback. Like I like bringing this in the bathroom. You know what? I guess coming from a guy, that is a compliment.
Yeah, it is.
It is. Really is. I had a website that was based on that preference, that whole premise. Like it was called Stitched Thrones, Light Baseball Reading for Your Time on the Porcelain Throne. That was the premise for the entire thing.
I stole your idea. We built a book.
I think it works. I've been wanting to write a bathroom reader ever since, and there it is. That's the one. You guys already wrote it.
Yeah, we talked about this with Mike though, because it is like dense. It's information dense. It's nutrient dense when it comes to like the amount of Twitter space you filled, but the content is just really intense.
Let me ask you.
I loved it.
Let me ask you. You guys are both baseball guys. I got a few minutes left. I want to just ask each of you. Let's talk about the baseball. Which chapter stood out? Which chapter did you learn something about more than any other? Which chapter did you think we may have gotten wrong and put a baseball player instead of someone else, or vice versa? Any like high level feedback is very interesting to me as the one who compiled all this research. So you guys can go in whatever order you want, but like just give me like your one high level baseball takeaway before I let you go.
Go ahead, Brig.
My first one is I talked to Mike about this. I was really sad not to see Lou Gehrig occupy Chapter 4, and he explained why, and I understand, and it's not a bad take at all. However, he's my man. He occupies my wall. So my favorite player of all time. I was a little.
I get it. Pride of the Yankees is my favorite sports movie. The Luckiest Man speech is the stuff of legend. He's the only player to ever wear number 4 for the Yankees. He was the first athlete to ever have his jersey retired. I think there are a lot of really good reasons to include Lou Gehrig. It just came down to our belief that Bobby Orr is probably the second greatest hockey player that ever lived. And if you're not going to put Bobby Orr in the book, then there's going to be so few hockey players that wind up in the book. Not to mention Babe Ruth is 3. Spoiler alert, Derek Jeter is 2, right? And so and Joe DiMaggio is 5. So the Yankees are well represented. Unfortunately, Lou Gehrig did not make the cut. And honestly, number 4 is obviously his number. 2130 is Lou Gehrig's number. So when we read the sequel and it has 3,000 chapters, I'll make sure to include it.
Okay.
The other one for me was 51. I never would have thought Dick Butkus, because initially as a Mariners fan, I went to Ichiro, right?
So that's interesting, because as a Mariners fan, you could also go to Randy Johnson.
Right. A
lot of his career. That's a really good. That's a great point to make. Off the top of my head, I don't remember if Ichiro wore 51 in Japan or not. Randy Johnson didn't wear 51 for his entire career. So those were potential tiebreakers for us. I think Dick Butkus has a serviceable case to belong at number 51.
For sure.
I do understand, though, as a fan of Seattle, that is not a city that is well represented in the book. And so if there was a chapter for which you could put a 51, it would most definitely have been one of those two guys. I think Randy Johnson is a greater player historically, but I'm not sure that he was a greater 51, if you know what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah. Okay, last question before you let go. Real quick, World Series pick. Who you got?
So I've got Atlanta coming out of the National League. To me, that's the best team. I think they have the fewest holes. The lineup is stacked. I think the rotation will be plenty good enough, especially when Mike Soroka comes back. And they have one of the best general managers in the league who, if they have a hole at all, he will fill it at the deadline like he did 2 years ago when they won the championship. I'm sticking with my preseason pick of the Blue Jays to win the American League, despite the fact that Tampa looks unbelievable and the Yankees are going to be really good too. It's my belief, though, that the Blue Jays are going to be able to beat you any number of ways. That lineup is going to, I think, wind up leading the American League in runs. I think they're stacked, loaded top to bottom. They're a much better defensive team this year than they were in the past. And the addition of Mike Bassett and Chris Bassett in the offseason, I think will make that rotation really, really whole. And the bullpen's pretty good too. I see that team as being one that will ascend and by the end of the season be the best team that will come out of the American League. I got the Braves over the Blue Jays winning the championship this year. I think we're wide open in the American League. I really do. I don't think the Astros have a stranglehold anymore. And the National League is loaded too. You could see 3 teams coming out of the East. I could see the Dodgers and Padres coming out of the West. And so far, Milwaukee looks really, really good in the Central. So I don't think this is going to be a chalky year at all. We're going to have a stretch run for the ages. I guarantee it.
Yeah,
for sure.
Love it.
All right, Hembo, thank you so much for joining us. We know you got to go. We really appreciate it a bunch.
Thanks, friends.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye. All right, man. Talk to you later.